Hey everyone, today we continue our story. We're going to talk about the life of Moses and how God used Moses. Last week we talked about Joseph and how God used him for his purposes. And what happens is many kings after Joseph, they come and they go and they forget and they start to enslave the people of God, the Hebrews, the Israelites. And they give them more and more things because the Israelites are multiplying and they're afraid of them. And so God decides to do something because he hears the cries of his people. His people are enslaved in Egypt. They are given more and more tasks, and the Pharaoh doesn't like that they are multiplying. And so eventually, because they're multiplying and there are too many and he's afraid of what's going to happen, he decides that he's going to kill all of the babies, all the male babies. And a child is born, a male child is born named Moses. And during this slavery time, and Moses' mom decides to try to save him. And she keeps him hidden. Eventually, she puts him into the Nile River, but in a basket to hopefully for him to be saved and found. Well, the daughter of Pharaoh finds Moses and adopts Moses. And Moses grows up in the house of Pharaoh. And in the house of Pharaoh, he learns a lot about, he's very well educated, and he grows up in that culture, and with close contact he would have been with his people. And all along he feels some kind of probably calling towards helping his people. One day Moses is going out and about, and he sees one of the slaves being abused, one of the Hebrew slaves being abused by Egyptian. And so Moses kills that Egyptian. And a little bit later, he goes out and he sees a couple of the slaves arguing each other. And he goes, "Stop it, you guys." And what happens is they go, "What are you going to do? Kill us like you killed the slaves?" So Moses realized that it's known that he has killed the Egyptian that was abusing the slaves. And so Moses flees into the wilderness. And eventually he becomes a sheep herder in the land of Midian. And many years he is there, and he has a wife and kids. And one day he's out herding the sheep in the middle of nowhere, and he sees a very strange thing. It's a burning bush. And out of that bush comes the voice of God. And through that encounter, God tells Moses who he is, that he is the I am, that he is the God of all the universe. And that through Moses, and he's going to use Moses, though Moses argues with him a little bit and doesn't want to do it, that he's going to use Moses to free his people Israel. That he's going to use Moses because he's heard the voices of his people crying out. And so he sends Moses, and he prepares Moses to go to Pharaoh. And so Moses goes to Pharaoh. And as he is with Pharaoh, he tells Pharaoh and what God has told him, and he says different signs he uses to talk about what God is going to do. This all-powerful God wants his people to be freed, but Pharaoh doesn't agree. And each time there's a plague, Pharaoh says, "Okay, you can go," and then he says no. And then he says yes, and then he says no, and then he says yes, and then he says no. And so this eventually leads to the last plague, which is the death of the firstborn. And so what has to happen is the Israelites have to put the blood of an unblemished lamb on the doorposts of their house. And Moses goes to Pharaoh and tells him. And Pharaoh doesn't believe anything that's going to happen. And so the Israelites, not the Egyptians, but the Israelites put the blood on their doorposts. And what happens is God passes over. And he passes over the houses of all of the Israelites, the Hebrews that have put the blood of this lamb on their doorposts and have eaten it, consumed it completely, have cooked it in the way that God had told them to, and he passes over. And what's really interesting in the midst of this is you start to see the glimpses of Jesus in this story, right? Of the Passover lamb. And so Pharaoh's firstborn is one of the children that dies because of this plague. And Pharaoh in the middle of the night is woken to the cries of his child dying. And Pharaoh has had it at this point. He is broken. And he tells them to get out, to do whatever they can. They must leave. And so Pharaoh sends the people of Israel away. They take a bunch of stuff from the Egyptians. The Egyptians give them all kinds of goods. And so the Israelites get out of town. They take everything with them. Well, we know what happens. Pharaoh recants, he gets angry, and he comes after them. And he decides he's going to chase them because he wants to destroy them. And they come to the Red Sea. And the Israelites are afraid. They don't know why God has done this to them. Doesn't know why God would put them out into the middle of nowhere and then for them to die. And God parts the sea for the Israelites so that they may go through, and they walk through on dry ground on this narrow path through the water on dry ground, which is a crazy, amazing miracle showing the power of God again. And the Israelites get to the other side. And the Egyptians have caught up because they have chariots and horses, and their whole army is after them. And the army of Pharaoh goes in the middle, and God, when Moses gets to the other side, tells him, and the waters close up on all of the army of Pharaoh, and they saw the whole army of Pharaoh die, and they praised God and sang songs. So now they are freed, but they're in the middle of nowhere. And as part of this, God tells Moses to come up to the mountain where his presence is. And he gives him these 10 commandments and these things. And while Moses is up there experiencing God and being with God and receiving what God is telling him of how God is going to covenant with them as a people, what happens? The people of Israel already have forgotten God, and so they ask Aaron to build this golden idol. And they start worshiping this golden idol. Moses comes down and he breaks the 10 commandments. He's mad, and God gets angry. God wanted to destroy the people, but Moses says, please don't. They're your people so that your name may be great. Don't destroy the people that you have taken out. Everybody will think that you're not great. And so, once again, he gets angry. He punishes them. And what happens is there's a lot of things that happen during that time. And one of the things is when they leave that place and they consecrate themselves and they receive all this stuff from God, they kind of forget that God had promised them something. And they go to the promised land. They get on the edge. They look over. They send people to do it. But they don't want the promised land that God has promised them because they're afraid. They don't trust the God who was able to part the waters and send plagues and send the burning bush and free them from Egypt. They don't believe in that he is powerful enough to give them the land that he has promised. And so God says, okay, then I'm going to give you what you want. You're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. You're going to wander without, I will be with you. I will take care of you. He fed them. He gave them water. He made sure they had what they needed until all of those who had disobeyed God had died. And right at the end of Moses' life, they get ready to enter the promised land. And Moses hands off power. He hands off leadership to Joshua, that Joshua would take the people into the promised land. And he blesses Joshua, and he tells him to not be afraid, that God would be with him just like he was with him, Moses. And Joshua, after the death of Moses, leads the people into the promised land flowing with milk and honey and with amazing places to live. And God gives them the land as he has promised. And back through the story, part of what we see is we see in the picture of the lamb on the doorpost, we see the picture of Jesus on the cross. That it was through his sacrifice as the lamb that we were able to be passed over by the wrath of God. That God would not send us to our death. That it was his blood, the perfect blood of the sinless one, Jesus Christ, that we were saved on our lives as doorposts, right? He saved us through the blood of Jesus Christ. And what's interesting is they also consecrated the firstborn after this, which is also a picture of Jesus because he was the firstborn among creation. He was the firstborn among the dead, right? When he rose again on the third day, just like the firstborn that they consecrated, Jesus was the firstborn to among the dead. And so he led the way for us to have eternal life. We also see in the picture of the parting of the water, there's this narrow way that they have to pass through, and it's a scary way, and it's not an easy way to go through, and they had to run through in the midst of fear, but Jesus is the narrow way. He is the only way to the other side, to salvation, to a right relationship with God. And throughout these stories, what do we see? We see the picture of a loving God who is all-powerful, who keeps his promises to us, who loves us, who rescues us, who uses a flawed man like Moses to accomplish his purposes. The story is about God and his love for his people that he chose to make his name known. And God is made known through his people, but it is only through Jesus Christ and what he did that we can have salvation. And today God uses us. I hope that this story gives you encouragement and that you can take the story of Moses. Though there's a lot more to it, I hope you go read it. There's a lot. You take the story of Moses as an encouragement that God is powerful enough. He is who he says he is. He keeps his promises with us, and he has provided a way of salvation. Go share that amazing God, the all-powerful God, who through his son, Jesus Christ, gives us life, with someone today. I hope to talk to you guys soon, and go read the story of Moses and share it with somebody else.